Hey teens, it's Ashley from Imaginative Libraries, and I'm back for another Teen Cooks video. So far, I've covered Pasta Puttanesca from a Bad Beginning by Lemony Snicket, and last week I made a kimchi fried rice volcano. This week, we're going to discuss recipes from what I think is probably the ultimate teen read, which is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. So, I'm sure many of you have read Twilight. If you haven't, you are definitely familiar with the storyline of Twilight. Twilight is all about a girl named Bella, she's 17 at the beginning of the book, who falls in love with a guy she meets when she moves to Forks, Washington, named Edward. Edward happens to be a vampire, and the whole book is about Bella grappling with her love for Edward and also the fact that Edward is a vampire. So it is a really popular book, and I reread it recently because Stephanie Meyer announced in August that she's going to release a book called Midnight Sun, which is a story that is about Twilight, but it's from Edward's perspective. So I reread it to brush up on the details of the book so I would be prepared for Midnight Sun. So today, the recipe we're going to make from Twilight is lasagna, and it's actually one of the few recipes that Bella talks about and cooks in the book, but she doesn't actually make. So in Twilight, the book, she eats throughout the whole book. She cooks throughout the whole book. It's one of the skills that Bella has is cooking. So she cooks marinated steak and potatoes for her dad on the first night, and she makes chicken enchiladas and grilled cheese. She also eats, famously, she eats mushroom ravioli when her and Edward are together for the first time, or like they're on a date together for the first time. She also eats lasagna when she and Edward decide they're going to be together. She eats lasagna in front of him. So we're gonna make lasagna. And because I don't make lasagna frequently, it's a recipe that has many, many steps. I am going to hybridize a recipe from this book, which is called Nothing Fancy by Alison Roman. There's a recipe in here called A Very Good Lasagna. So we're going to use that recipe as a basis for our lasagna, but I'm also going to stuff mini meatballs inside our lasagna today. So let's talk a little bit more about Twilight and why you should read it. But I also want to discuss common kitchen fears and how to overcome these kitchen fears. In Twilight, Bella doesn't seem to have any kitchen fears. She just cooks automatically, but I know that's not the case for everyone. So we're going to discuss common kitchen fears and how to overcome them. And we're also going to make the mini meatballs. Meatballs, or making meatballs or meatloaf, that's a skill that takes patience, and it can be a little gross. So we're going to do that together. Why don't we read the recipe and then let's get started. We'll make the pasta sauce. So here is a picture of Alison Roman's lasagna. It looks really decadent. The ingredients for her pasta sauce are oil and onions and garlic, anchovies, tomato paste, tomato sauce, the basics. Alison Roman seems to really like anchovies, but me too, so we're gonna add those to the sauce. The sauce is going to take the longest to prepare for this recipe, so we're going to get a jump on that. And then we're going to make the mini meatballs. So let's look at our ingredients. So here are some of the ingredients I'm working with today. Here's my onion. I'm going to use a lot of garlic in this sauce. So she said tomato paste, crushed tomatoes. Alison Roman did it in her recipe, but I have tomato sauce and these whole peeled tomatoes, so that's what we're going to use as the base here. Oregano, chili flakes, and that special anchovy paste. Why don't we cut up this onion, mince the garlic, saute everything, and we'll talk about some kitchen fears. So I hear a lot of people telling me that they have two specific fears when cooking, which is cutting themselves with a knife and burning themselves on something hot, which those are valid fears. Like those fears, or like those things like burning yourself and cutting yourself, that definitely happens in a kitchen. But I'm going to give you some tips on how to combat those fears, because the fear of cutting yourself with this knife or the fear of accidentally burning your hand on an element, there are easy ways to navigate around those fears so you can still cook excellent food. So as for the fear of cutting yourself with a knife, so you're obviously not going to cut yourself on this hand, the hand that's holding the knife, but this is the hand that could get cut, right? Like you could accidentally nick your finger. But like I've talked in my first two videos, the way you hold your knife and the way you guide your knife with this hand is really important. So if you're guiding your knife and you're watching yourself dice, then the fear of cutting yourself should be quelled. We are going to pay excellent attention when we're cutting, because this is not something we can do just automatically. It's not like an automatic function for us. Even if we're really great at cooking, cutting yourself could still happen. So we're gonna dice this onion, but when I'm dicing the onion, I'm gonna make sure all my fingers are holding this knife so it doesn't slip and cut this hand. This hand is going to be in a claw formation the whole time holding my ingredient. So the chances of me accidentally nicking myself, those go way down, like way down. So we are going to cut this onion in half. It's quite a big onion. We are going to leave this root side on, just like last time. Let's peel the onion. Seems like, for this recipe, I am going to use the whole onion, so we're going to cut the whole thing up here. We've left the root side on. Let's cut the stem off, and we're slicing vertical and horizontal. Let's do the horizontal first. I'm going to cut 4 or 3 horizontal cuts here, slices here. I want this to be a medium dice, so 3 horizontal slices should be suffice. See, I'm holding the onion with my fingertips. That gives me a really good grip on it. I'm watching where I put my knife. I never take my eyes away from my knife because my eyes are what's guiding it downwards, right? If you are vigilant, you can create these awesome dices without cutting yourself. Just got to remember where our hands are positioned for a knife. We're ready for the next step of our sauce. As you can see, my onions are beyond translucent. They're starting to caramelize. We want them to be this translucent because we want them to melt into our sauce. The next step of my sauce is to crush these tomatoes by hand into the pan. I'm going to do that. I forgot to say that to my onions, there was olive oil that became to a shimmer in the pan, and then I added my onions, and then I added a couple of teaspoons of oregano and a teaspoon of Italian chili flakes and probably 2 teaspoons of anchovy paste. So all of those flavors were melting in the pan, and then I hand crushed all these tomatoes. I'm going to simmer them on a higher heat for a couple minutes, and then I'm going to add the rest of the sauce from this can of whole peeled tomatoes, and this tomato sauce. And I'm going to add probably 4 or 5 cloves of garlic, and maybe some salt. We're gonna give it a taste. And then I'm gonna let it simmer for probably an hour to an hour and a half. When I'm done, we'll come back and make those meatballs. We're on to our mini meatballs. In this bowl, I have a pound of turkey and a pound of flavored sausage. Now you can use any flavored sausage for this, but I used a sausage that I think will be compatible with my lasagna. I've also added a 1/4 cup of blanched almond meal and a couple teaspoons each of garlic powder, salt, and pepper. Now I'm just gonna mix it all up. This is the most hands-on part of our lasagna project. It takes probably about a minute for everything to come together. The texture of meatballs is really strange to feel, but I think the payoff is greater than the time spent making these meatballs and that strange raw meat feeling. We want to get everything really evenly incorporated. You can't over mix these meatballs. Our pasta sauce is done. It's been simmering on the stove for about an hour and a half. We made our meatballs. They went into the oven at 400 degrees for about 20 minutes. They're nice and brown and done as well. Now we need to make our cheese filling for the pasta, for the lasagna. So I have a bowl here. I'm going to put 3 types of cheese in here. I'm going to put ricotta, about a cup of ricotta, about a cup of fresh mozzarella. And my fresh mozzarella came in this ball, so I'm going to crumble it in here. I also have some I have some heavy cream on the reserve on the side here, just in case our filling isn't silky enough. You can add some heavy cream to it. And I have Parmesan. Behind me on the stove, while I'm making this filling, I also have a pot of lasagna noodles boiling. Now, we're not going to cook these lasagna noodles like you would any other pasta. We don't want them to become al dente. We want them to be slightly stiff still because they're going to finish cooking baked into the lasagna pan. I said before, when cooking pasta, you want your pasta water to be as salty as possible, like salty like the sea. If you don't know how salty that should be, try your pasta water, give it a taste. You want it to be super, super salty because all that salt is going to give pasta the right flavor. Like it's going to impart a flavor to the noodles that is otherwise not there. So nice and salty. I have the pasta. It's almost done here. After I'm done mixing all this cheese together, we're gonna layer it. And I'm actually going to do little mini lasagnas because I have mini meatballs and that'll be cute. I have all my ingredients ready here to make our lasagnas, to finally compile them. I've finished folding in all my cheese. Folding means just taking whatever's on the bottom of your bowl and bringing it to the top. Like that. My cheese mixture is all ready to go. My meatballs are ready to go down here. My pasta sauce is to the side. And my noodles are here, not quite al dente. So I have these cute little ramekins. We're gonna layer. You start off, maybe not quite a ladle full of pasta sauce. On top of that, a noodle. I tried to break these noodles up before I boiled them, but they just shattered. So I have a pair of scissors here, and I'm going to cut my noodles so they fit into my bowl here. Then I'm going to add maybe 2 tablespoons of cheese to the bottom of my dish. Spread it around. Not too much cheese, like that. And then I'm gonna add onto that cheese probably 3 meatballs, maybe 4 meatballs. And then another ladleful. It's going to be a very full ramekin of sauce and pasta. And another ladleful. Make sure you completely cover your pasta. And then I'm gonna just crumble some more cheese on top of that. So the last thing I want to talk to everyone about is the fear of burning yourself on an elementor stove. Even though I've been cooking for a really long time, that's still my big cooking fear, is burning myself. It almost seems like it's the easiest hurt to get in a kitchen, burning yourself on accident. But, you know, I think the way we can combat our fear of burning ourselves is to just be so vigilant of where we're placing our hands at all times, and also to keep hot pot holders and trivets around us and use them as frequently as we're going near a stove. Like, you can't overuse a hot pot holder. So there's my lasagna. I'm gonna cover these ramekins and put them in the oven for about 20 minutes. My oven's still hot from the meatballs. 20 minutes covered with some aluminum foil on my baking sheet, and then I'm going to uncover the lasagnas and bake them for probably another further 15 minutes after that. Guys, look at these lasagnas. So bubbly. This is exactly how your lasagna should look like. It's all melded together. Look at the side of it. So I have spent most of the day making this lasagna. I took it out of the oven probably 20 minutes ago. It should be cooled down by now. Lasagna is notorious for retaining its heat, so after you take it out of the oven, make sure you let it cool, let it sit for a while. Also, letting it sit will further blend the flavors of the cheese and tomato sauce and those meatballs together. So it should be cool enough to eat. Let's give it a test. I'm gonna try to get a meatball. Still steaming. Look at all that cheese. It is so good. When I was a kid, lasagna was my very favorite food. Like, I loved lasagna, so making this now brings me back a little bit. I also, so like I said, I predominantly consulted Alison Roman's lasagna recipe, which doesn't have meat in it, but what got me on this lasagna kick, besides listening to Bella say that she was eating leftover lasagna when she and Edward were falling in love. She eats leftover lasagna. Is I got this in the mail. This cover recipe is a recipe for woven lasagna, which before they bake it, they weave the lasagna sheets together so the lasagna is crispy. That sounds great too. But this time I just made a traditional lasagna, except with the little mini meatballs. I also looked at Bon Appetit's Very Best, I think it's called Very Best, Bon Appetit's lasagna recipe to see what a traditional lasagna called for. But if you are looking for the recipe that I used, like the pasta sauce I used and the method I used, the very best lasagna from Nothing Fancy by Alison is the recipe that I took my instruction, or it's the book that I took my instruction for. So I would recommend, if you want this book, I got it from the library, so you can put a hold on it. If you haven't read Twilight and you are like, wow, a story about this great romance and vampires and adventure, intrigue, sounds great. You can borrow it from the library. The library has a hold of it. And also through your library card, you can put a hold on it at Montana Library to Go online. So 2 options there for you for Twilight. This book is also available at the library. I hope that moving forward, we think about where our hands go when we're cooking. I also would encourage you to cook something that takes some patience, that takes some time this week, like this lasagna. But all that patience that we had today, making the pasta sauce, making the meatballs, folding in the cheese, really paid off. This lasagna is excellent. So thanks for watching. I will see everyone next time. Enjoy!